Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of loss of close family members, suicide, mental health struggles, and so on. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content may be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember, this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to me. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I have a very special guest today who's one of my very dear friends. Her name is Kellyn, and she is a resilient 35-year-old entrepreneur who runs her own successful business with nearly 15 years of marriage to her husband and a joyful 3-year-old son named Calvin. He's adorable. She navigates the complexities of family life with grace and determination. Raised in a family of 3 siblings, Kellyn has faced significant loss, having tragically lost both of her parents. Despite these challenges, she has persevered, drawing strength from her experiences to build a fulfilling life for herself and her loved ones. With a passion for healing, Kellyn has dedicated 15 years to the practice of massage therapy, bringing comfort and relief to countless individuals through her skilled hands and compassionate heart. Let's talk to Kellyn about her inspiring journey, including her experience of caring for her parents in the time of need. We'll delve into the highs and lows of her caregiving role and explore the resilience and love that sustained her through life's toughest moments. All right, welcome, Kellyn. How was that?
Hi. Sounds great.
So do you maybe want to start maybe the very beginning of when your parents started getting sick, or I think it was your dad that got sick first, right?
Yeah. Yeah, my dad was the first. He was a hardcore smoker, heavy pack a day, 2 packs a day, I'm sure at some points of his life,
Yeah.
cigarette smoker. He got diagnosed with lung cancer in April of 2010.
And how old were you
And
at
then
at that time?
I was 21 at the time
Okay.
because he passed same year in December of 2010, and it was right before I turned 22. So everything happened pretty quickly with him. I was actually the reason why he ended up going into the doctor and found out he had cancer.
Okay, let's back up a little bit then and go through that. What kind of started leading you to thinking that there was something up?
I was living up in Denver at the time. I finally had my own apartment, and Jake and I were dating. We met in May of 2009. So we had been together for about a year. I guess a little bit before a year when we found out that my dad had lung cancer. But anyway, that Christmas I had gotten a cold and went down and stayed at my parents' house, and got everybody sick.
Oh no.
And And my dad, the cough just never really went away. And he always had that smoker's cough and everything, but it was a little bit worse than normal. And my mom was concerned, and he was like, all right, maybe it's time. I should go get this checked out. And went in, and yeah, it was just one thing led to another from there. I didn't really know until he was already going through getting CAT scans and figuring out what stage it was at when my parents finally told me,
What was
youngest
he?
sibling. He was 50. He would have been 53 when he got diagnosed
Okay.
because his birthday's in July. So he turned 54 during the summer going through all the treatment and everything. So yeah, my mom called me one day, and Jake and I had the day off together. We were going to go to the zoo. They were doing one of the free day things. And my mom called me and she was like, "Hey, I'm up by your apartment. Do you want to meet me at this Starbucks that's right here?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. We'll be right there." And she was sitting at a table. And so Jake and I went in and sat down and had some coffee. And she was like, "Your dad is across the street at St. Joe's right now getting scans done. He has cancer, and now we're just in the motions of trying to figure out where it's at and what the next steps are." And I was just, okay, cool.
So he's 53, you said, right? And you're 21. Everybody is super young in this situation, dealing with these
Yeah.
emotions. He's too young to have cancer, and you're too young
Yes.
to be hearing my dad has cancer. Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely life-changing for sure. I didn't know how to process the information for a while.
What was
Um,
going through your head in that moment, like when your mom said that?
I I don't really know. I feel like that I remember it so vividly, but at the same time, I don't. It's like one of those
Sure.
things where when you experience tragic or very emotional days or moments in your life where you're like, I remember exactly where I was at when 9/11 happened. And I remember exactly where I was at when, like tragic things happened to you. And I couldn't, I think it, I know which Starbucks we were sitting at. I couldn't tell you, oh, what did I order or this, that,
Yeah.
and the other. But I remember just looking at my mom and she just being so nonchalant about it. But also, I think she was just trying to be so calm and everything's going to be okay. But we just wanted to let you know. And she was just being so strong about it that I remember being like, oh, okay, my dad's got cancer. We're not surprised. He's a smoker. We've always joked about it. That was always our thing whenever we were trying to get dad to quit smoking. We were like, well, if you don't, you're going to get lung cancer.
Oh,
And
shit.
he's like, oh, I know. And then here we are. It was odd. I think it was just a moment of, okay, we only know so much information. So it was just like, all right, at least I know now what the path might look like. We'll figure it out once we know how, because at that point they were just trying to figure out, okay, how far along is it? How many tumors are there? Is it going to be able to be operated on and we can just do surgery and it's fine? Or do we need to go the chemo route? Do we need to do like what the plan was going to be? So there was still a lot to be figured out at that point. It was just in the beginning stages of figuring it all out. I think just in the moment, I trying to figure out steps and what's going on. But when you're dealing with cancer, there's so many moving parts. And especially in the beginning days when you're just, okay, I've got this diagnosis, but what the hell does that mean?
How
Because
long is
there's
that
so many different
process
avenues.
from when you found out he has lung cancer, they've run all those tests, to determining a treatment plan? What's that
What
time?
was the process like?
Yeah. What's the time frame like?
The
Is it
time frame?
a long period of time before you finally make a plan and start the chemo or start the whatever process is? Or is it pretty quick once you're like, okay, you have lung cancer, here's what we do?
It moved pretty quickly. It was April, beginning-ish of April, middle of April, I think, when my mom told me when we met her at that Starbucks and she told me. And then he started chemo, I would say within a month,
Okay.
because
So
he
pretty quick.
had, I know, yeah, pretty quick. I feel like they once they know what everything looks like and they get a plan in motion, they tend to jump on it pretty quickly. It's not exactly something you want to just be like, okay, we're gonna wait and see what happens.
Yeah,
Usually they're
sure.
like, okay, you have cancer. We need to take care of this. Let's get you in. Let's do this. Your first treatment's Monday
Oh,
kind of
wow.
things. Yeah, he started with the chemo and had, I think, at least one, maybe two chemo treatments. And we all went camping as a family up in Grand Lake for Memorial Day that year. And my best friend and her boyfriend came up and they were tent camping with me. So I was in a tent. The middle brother is the middle child. So my younger of the two brothers and I were in one tent. And then my oldest brother and his wife were in my parents' fifth wheel with them. And my Micah, my oldest brother, I wake up to him like, Kellyn, I need you to wake up. and just out of like deep sleep woke me up, and he's dad's flight for life. He's on his way down to Denver. I need you to come and stay in the camper with the dogs. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And my dad had, I don't honestly remember the stage that they classified it as, but the major tumor that he had was in like the lower right lung, and it had a major blood vessel that it was grown around. And so my dad had woke up in the middle of the night coughing and started coughing up blood.
While you were camping.
They called while we were camping. We were at a campground, so it's not like we were just backwoods, because my parents had a fifth wheel, so they had to have the hookups and everything. But we're like Grand Lake, far out there away from big city. When they flight for life him, they took him down to St. Anthony's in Denver. And he was like, oh, it was only like a 30-minute airplane or a helicopter ride. But it took us 3 hours to get back down there. So they flight for life him down. And my mom and my brother and my sister-in-law headed down to the hospital with them to go be with him. And then my other brother and my best friend and her boyfriend woke up the next morning, and I was in the camper. And my brother comes in and he's like, where is everybody? And I'm like, Dad's in the hospital down in Denver. Something happened last night. That was definitely the first scary moment, going through everything with him.
What were your thoughts then?
And I think,
were you starting to think, oh, this is pretty serious, this is pretty bad? And then it being only 21 years old or whatever, I don't know. What goes through your head when that happens? Because not very many people go through that at such a young age.
yeah, I think that instance was definitely, I think, an eye-opener for me, because before that I was just maybe a little young and naive, just thinking, oh, my dad has cancer, but it's fine, he'll beat it. And that was his mentality. He's, yeah, I've got this, but I'm gonna come out of it on the other end, and I'm gonna beat this thing. I'm gonna beat this thing. That was what he would talk about. And so I think that moment was definitely the first time that kind of scared me. And it was the first time I thought, oh, things might not end well. And of course, I tried to stay optimistic and always think everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. There's a reason he's doing the treatments. It's going to work. Everything's going to be good, and he's going to come out the other side of it. But that was definitely so scary. Like when your dad is literally coughing up blood, it's terrifying.
Sure.
Terrifying to think about. And he couldn't breathe because he couldn't catch his breath.
Oh my God.
So that was the scary part too. But after that, things were a little better for a little while.
Okay. Just a one little quick early scare, huh?
Yeah, a little hiccup for sure. He did pretty well with the chemo. They did, I don't remember exactly like how the frequency of his treatments were. I think it was like either once a week or once every other week that he was doing a chemo, and they did so many rounds. And then at the end of summer, they did a scan. He finished the chemo treatments. They did a scan, and he was doing really well. He had responded amazing to the chemo. All the tumors that he had shrunk by 50%. They were super optimistic. He was doing really well. And then they started him on a round of radiation through the fall. And again, tolerated it pretty well. He definitely didn't have a great appetite. Like my dad was always a super picky eater. And I remember at one point I was I going through, no, I wasn't. I had graduated my first year of massage school.
Okay.
But then when he was doing his radiation treatment, they had these massage therapists that would come to the hospital and do Reiki treatments on the people going through either chemo. Most of the time it was the people going through radiation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually how I found out about Colorado School of Healing Arts, is through my dad going through all the chemo treatments. And so working with him, like just doing things that I already knew from my first year of school, I was working on him, just helping him feel better going through like the chemo treatments. And a lot of it was working on his lungs because he was just coughing all the time. And so those muscles were just so fatigued and so sore all the time. And then he was getting the treatments, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. And so I found the school and I got enrolled, and I started got put my whole program together, and I started back at school in October of 2010.
What a
And
crazy
I
turn
had
of
full
events.
intention of,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
no, you're fine.
that's so crazy to, I don't know, I don't know when this episode's going to air exactly, but the last interview that I just did, we were talking about, would you go back and change the things that, would you do it over again? Would you change it so that those things didn't happen? Now, obviously, you'd rather have your dad here, but
Of course.
also looking at it from that perspective too, that's crazy. That triggered you to go to that school and you learned all that and took your life maybe a slightly different direction than you thought it would. And yeah, that's
Oh
wild.
yeah, 100%. And it's crazy to think about that had my dad not had cancer, that maybe I wouldn't have gone back to massage school, or maybe I would have, but down the road, or maybe it wouldn't have been that school, or you never know. The sliding door effect of which path did you take in life and where did it take you? But yeah, that was definitely the reason why I ended up back at school, was my dad going through cancer.
And how
So,
did you feel?
the silver lining to things for sure.
Yeah, how did you feel then being able to provide that treatment for him yourself and being able to help? I feel like probably a lot of people feel helpless in that because you really just have to trust the medical industry and team that's working with you, but to be able to actually physically help him yourself, like how did you feel about that?
It was awesome. Ultimately, it was great that I could do just this thing that didn't feel like it was anything to me. For me to give my dad a massage was just like, this is what I do. This is what I went to school for. This is what is going to be my career that I'm trying to make happen. So for me, it was just, I'm just doing it just to do it. But for him, it helped him feel so much better. And it made me feel better that I could help him just get through a day of, like, after a chemo treatment, when you have zero energy and you feel like complete garbage and
Mm.
all you want to do is sleep, and probably all you want to do is throw up at some point.
Yeah.
He wasn't too terrible with the nausea. It was more just zero appetite. Like,
Mm.
trying to get him to eat anything, it was like hot dogs and PB&J sandwiches for months.
Yeah.
That first quarter, I started with a lot of the reflexology. So that was most of what I was doing for him, was the reflexology stuff, because you could literally work on the lungs by hitting and working points through the bottom of the feet, which reflexology is so powerful with that stuff. And I love it. I still use that day to day.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the majority of what I was doing. And then practicing other things, and then just giving him normal massages just to help feel better in general. Yeah. And then he passed away in December. So it was right as I was going through finals and everything. I only had one final left the day that, or I guess the week that he passed. So that one was a tough one to get through, because I was not in a place to be studying or
Yeah.
really have any sort of mental thought train to make a final happen. But thankfully it was massage school. It's not like going in for a thesis paper or something like that. But still, I was supposed to come up with the final project. It was basically coming up with something that related to, I think it was like a body, like either an organ system or a body function. And so I was like, all right, cool. I'm gonna talk about lungs. And
Oh
lungs are
yeah.
a huge, like, grief holder
Oh,
as well. Yeah, if you didn't know
I did not know
that.
that. So
Yeah. Yeah. And so I wrote a poem about being a lung and came up with this crappy little plastic bag looking thing. And I was like, it's a lung.
oh gosh, I'm sure.
My
So when did you finally, okay, so from when you found out, did he pass away? Was that unexpected at that point, or had they been prepping you like, hey, it's not looking great? Or what was that part like? Or was it like, oh crap, he's gone? What was the story there?
For my dad, it was very unexpected. To a certain extent, yes, he has cancer. He's going through chemo and everything. There's always that possibility. Yes, but also he was doing really well. He was responding really well to the chemo treatments. And when he passed, we were in just like a waiting period. He had done the chemo over the summer and he had just finished the radiation. So did, they wanted to wait and see how the radiation was going to go. And so we were in this waiting period. He was supposed to have a scan on December 28th. I remember that because that's my husband's birthday. And he passed on December 13th. And
Wow.
that same tumor that crossed through the major blood vessel hematomed, or I guess the blood vessel hematomed. So the same thing that happened when we were camping happened again,
Ugh.
but to a more uh, basically his lungs filled up with blood while he was sleeping, and when he woke up he couldn't breathe and was coughing up blood again, and it was just, there was just so much blood. That is what ended up happening in the end. Thankfully he was at home. That was always his big thing, is he didn't want to die in a hospital. He didn't want to die anywhere else. Like the fact that he died at home was definitely a good thing, and it made us all feel a little bit better about it. But my mom was home, and she heard him. He was sleeping on the couch because he needed to sleep a little elevated. Because you know, when sometimes when you're super sick and you're really congested and laying flat, all you want to do is cough like
Yeah.
nonstop. So being a little elevated can help you.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
that's what, where he was at. It was just easier for him to sleep on the couch because he could prop himself up on some pillows. And he was still working. He was 54, still working, wasn't retired yet.
Yeah.
And my dad always worked from home. He was an IT guy, so he worked for IBM at the time.
Mhm.
And my mom woke up and heard him like up and about and like coughing and everything. So she was like, "Oh, okay, he's up. He'll get going for his meeting." And then she fell back asleep. And however much longer it was, woke up and she didn't hear him on a phone call. She didn't hear him in the office. And she was like, "This is odd. He should be awake." So she got out of bed and went out to the kitchen, and he was basically lying down behind the counter. We have in that house, there was a big island in the middle of the kitchen, and then the sink was up against the wall. And he was basically had fallen backwards from being over the sink.
Wow.
And I wasn't there. I didn't live at home at that point, but from what my mom told me, there was a lot of blood in the sink. And then
Mm.
basically he had
Oh,
just passed out and fallen backwards from there. Mom was the one that found him. And
geez, that had to be so hard.
then I
Like,
can't really even imagine.
yeah. So how obviously this is a horrible news to get that your dad passed. What kind of emotions were you going through at that point?
There will always be losing my dad, obviously going through that, so young. And it was so unexpected that my mom called me, and I just remember her voice being like, "Hi." And I was like, "Hey, mom." And like, she called me in the morning. And the weird thing was, Micah had called me 20 minutes before that. And he was like, "Hey, do you know which apartment number is Nathan's?" Because none of us, at that point, none of us were living at home. And then after my dad died, there was points where Nathan was in and out living with my mom.
And Nathan
But
and
at that
Micah
point, none of
are
us were home.
your brothers. We need to specify that.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah. Nathan is the middle child. And then Mike is the oldest of the three of us. And I'm the youngest of the three kiddos. And so Micah calls me, and it was a Monday. I remember it was a Monday when he died. And Micah calls me and he's like, "Hey, do you know what apartment is Nathan's?" And I was like, "I have no idea. I've never actually been there. I know roughly where his apartment is, but I don't know which one it is." And he's like, "Okay, cool, bye." And hung up the phone. And I was like, "Okay, whatever." That was weird. And I fell back asleep. I was just laying there. And then my mom calls and I was like, "Hey." And she's, "Oh, did I wake you up?" And I was like, "No, I'm just been lying here." I was off that day. I was trying to, I think I had school on Mondays, but at that point, that class was over because I had already done my final for that class. And she goes, "Daddy's gone," and just paused. And I just remember being like, it was just, "What did you just say? Like, what?" And when you don't believe that those words just came out and that it's true, I didn't want to believe it.
Of course.
When my dad died, it was so hard. It was so hard. I just remember I was like, all right, I have to get up. I have to get down there. And she was like, well, just come down to the house and we'll figure everything out. Micah is on his way to get Nathan and they're coming here. And she was like, they had already, basically my mom called 911 and they came and got him and took him and everything. And she spent a while with the grief support people that they have to help people. And so by the time we got there, and I think even by the time Micah and Crystal, my sister-in-law, and Nathan got to the house, everybody was gone. It was just my mom. And so Jake got in the shower really quick while I was still on the phone with my mom. And I got in the shower and I just remember bawling like so hard and crying my eyes out and just feeling like my heart had literally just been ripped from my chest. And I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even like think. I couldn't think. My heart was broken. I couldn't believe he was gone. I didn't want to believe he was gone. I just kept thinking, this is all a dream. This is all a dream. I need to wake up. But it was real life. And it was the hardest day of my life to this point. Probably harder than the day that I lost my mom because it was so unexpected. I didn't think he was going to die. I thought he was going to make it through and he would be just fine. So that was hard. That was one of the hardest days of my life.
I can imagine. And then being so young and processing. And then you were trying to have this like super positive outlook, like he's going to do chemo, he's going to do great, he's going to make it through this, everything's going to be fine. And then to get that phone call, I just can only imagine how devastating that was. Like, I'm so sorry that you went through that.
Thanks. In the long run, I was so thankful that I was going through massage school at that time because I had this constant community of healers around me when you're grieving. And I had never lost anybody by that point. I had lost some grandparents, but I was young. And grandparents are grandparents and you love them, but they're not your parents. They're not that immediate heartstring attachment. And losing my dad was the first real loss and first real experience with grieving that hard.
And that's an intense
and
grief.
not knowing and not knowing how to deal with it either. You've never been in that situation and now all of a sudden you're like, oh, how do I live life now?
21 years old. We all know, looking
Yeah.
back, you're how old now? 35?
35.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was in my bio. 35. You've probably learned so much now. And not that grief is any easier every time you have to go through it. And I believe it doesn't ever go away, but it does get a little bit easier to deal with as time goes on.
No.
And then you learn the tools and you learn some things. But when you're in your early 20s, you don't have those tools yet. There's so much life experience that brings those tools to you.
Oh, yeah. And the hardest part about losing my dad is that you have your parents are there to help you figure out life, especially when you're 21. And yeah, you might think that you know all the answers, but you have no fucking clue.
Right.
And you have no idea.
We
and
all think
your
we
parents
do,
are
but
there to help you navigate life.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. And my dad was the person that he was the one that you go to when you're like, okay, this is where I'm at. What do I do? And he would always try to I'm not just going to give you the answer. I'm going to help you figure it out. And my dad was that type of person where you're just like, hey, this is what I've got going on. What do I do? How do I manage this? And he'd be like, all right, let's look at this and let's walk through it and we'll figure it out together. And he was just that type of person that you could go to with anything. And he'd help you figure it out. He'd talk it through with you. And
so you guys were
or
really
if it
close.
was just, my oldest brother and him, it was really hard for all of us, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
My parents had been married for, it was 31 years, I think 31 and a half technically. And so obviously my mom was just, her life got ripped away from her. And so that was one thing. My oldest brother and my dad were best friends. Like Micah and him talked every day. And I talked to my parents almost every day at that point too. And so it was hard for all of us. And I just remember, and even to this day, there's times where I'm just like, oh, God damn it. I just want to ask my dad this question. He
Mhm.
would know the answer. Like, or really anything when it comes to life, you always have your parents in your corner to help you figure it out. And losing that was part of the hardest part about losing him, losing your life navigator.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you
So,
relied upon that pretty heavily too.
right. Yeah, and he was so handy. He would do woodworking as a hobby. The house that we ended up selling after my mom passed away, that was the house that my dad died in. And when we bought that house, when my parents bought that house, it was May-ish of 2001. They basically bought it sight unseen. They liked the fact that it was on 2 acres. My dad didn't have neighbors looking into his windows or couldn't see his back neighbor from the kitchen window.
Yeah.
And so my dad was like, I don't care. I don't even care what it looks like. I'll just go in and rip out walls and make it what I want.
All right.
And that's what we did. We moved into that house, and literally the whole first summer we were in that house, it was under construction.
Oh,
We had like
geez.
curtains up because walls were exposed and
Yeah.
the whole 9 yards. And my dad did the majority, anything that wasn't electrical or plumbing, my dad did all of the work to that house
Oh,
with
wow.
friends' help, but in our help. The
Oh,
demo
yeah.
part was definitely the
Oh,
fun part.
yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my dad was just so handy. He was always around to be able to help you with the life stuff, the figuring out the life stuff, and the hey dad, I need you to fix this hole in my wall.
That's always nice to have too, for sure.
Yeah.
So then your mom gets sick. What was the time difference between your dad passing and your mom getting sick with her diagnosis, and how did that all go?
So it was very different for my mom. My dad's was literally 9 months start to end, same year, everything. My mom's was a 5 year journey.
Okay.
Her cancer started as colon. So it was August of 2013. She got the colon cancer diagnosis.
So about
And so a
2.5
little
years
under
after your
three
dad?
years after
Yeah.
I lost my dad.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. All of a sudden it was like this, oh, fuck. Are you kidding me? I have to go through this again?
For
Kind
sure.
of
Was
feeling
there a
when she
lot of
told
anger there, I'm sure?
not with, not right away,
Okay.
because hers was the colon cancer wasn't, it hadn't progressed. They caught it really early. And so she did a surgery for that. They took out like a chunk of her colon, and she obviously it was mostly just the recovering portion for that. But otherwise they did surgery. They were like, we got it all. We're confident. And then it was just monitoring things from that point on. But yeah, they caught it early enough that it really wasn't, she didn't do chemo, she didn't have to do radiation or any of that for the colon cancer. Technically, we don't know for sure, but my mom had a hysterectomy in 2008. And when they went back through, they biopsied the tissue just to make sure that there wasn't any cancer. And they did find cancer cells, and they went back and scanned her, and nothing had breached the walls of the uterus. So they were like, nope, you're good. We got it all. Thank God. She was having some issues. So thank God they did the hysterectomy when they did, because that might have ended up being the first cancer. So technically, the colon cancer was the first official diagnosis for her. So that was August of 2013. And then, oh gosh, it would have been November of 2015 is when it had metastasized to her liver. So she got the liver diagnosis in 2015.
And that was from
Um,
the colon cancer then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So certain strains of cancer usually tend to metastasize. Like colon will go to, it went from colon to the liver, and there's certain paths that certain type of cancers will follow. So it was the same cancer, just ended up in the liver. And her doctor that had done the colon cancer surgery was just like so devastated. He was like, I got it all. I thought I got it all. I just don't understand. And all it takes is one cell. When you can't know if you got every single cell out unless you're like going in with a microscope kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that's not going to show up until you get enough to make a tumor or make a spot or make it noticeable.
So it was about two
Um,
years later then that she thought she was clear with the colon cancer. You guys all thought she was clear. And then 2 years later, it had metastasized to her liver.
yes. Yeah. And so they did chemo for the liver cancer. So
So
she went
again, you guys
through,
all think that you're in the clear and everything's okay. Like mom made it, everything's good. We don't have to do
yeah,
this again. And then you're like, fuck, we have to do this again.
yes. Yeah. I know each time it was always like, you feel like you've made, okay, we're good. Mom's doing good. And then it's bam, ah, just kidding. So it was with my mom's, it was just such a different experience because dad's was just like, bam, it was so quick. But my mom's was just this like long journey and ups and downs with the colon. It was, pretty easy, but then the liver cancer and having to do the chemo. And my mom tolerated chemo drastically different than my dad did. My dad was just like no appetite, but didn't really have a lot of nausea. My mom had no problem with eating. She still had plenty of appetite and everything, but she would just be so nauseous and would really struggle energy wise. Usually, I think it was like the day of and the day after she would do chemo, she would just be wiped, just pretty much slept the whole time. But then she would bounce back by the end of the week and be okay. And then her chemos were, I think it was every 2 or 3 weeks, and then it was a couple months. But I think it was only, it didn't seem like it was like a long time that she had to do the chemo. I think it was only a couple months. And she lost all of her hair. She got a wig that she could wear if she was going out for special events. But otherwise, she really rocked the bald head and
Good for
losing her hair.
her.
And then she just, I know, she would just wear, I mean, it was winter. So obviously wearing beanies a lot because when you're used to having hair and then all of a sudden it's gone, you realize how warm your hair keeps your head.
Yeah, for sure. My husband talks about that all the time. Yeah.
So yeah, so she rocked it and she always had a very positive outlook on it, and she let her hair grow in just however it was going to grow back, that was how she was going to let it grow in, and it was just stark white.
Oh, wow.
But it looked so good on her. She rocked
Mm.
it. It was awesome. So I remember by summer she was doing really good. They monitored her for a long time, but she never did radiation. She just did the first major round of the chemo. And then after that, she would do like this booster shot kind of thing, like once a month. But yeah, I mean, by summer, it was just back to regular life again. And we're just monitoring this and we'll see where it goes.
So what was your
Um,
role in that time frame as she's going through? Because obviously your dad's gone. Your mom was probably the caretaker for your dad through all of that stuff, but now your mom doesn't necessarily have somebody. So were you jumping
yeah.
in, you and your brothers jumping in a lot on that, or what was that look like?
Yeah, especially going through the chemo treatments, especially going through with the chemo treatments, usually one of us was picking her up or taking her. And then she got to a point where she was like, I can just drive myself. It's not really until the next day that I feel totally wiped. So the first couple, I remember I always took her because they were always on Mondays, so I was off. But yeah, and I spent a lot of time going down and helping her out or taking her to the grocery store if she didn't feel like driving or just going down to help her clean the house or hang out with her. And I was always down hanging out with my mom and I talked to her every day. It was weird if I didn't talk to her. on a day. So yeah, she did okay taking care of herself, but obviously we were around to help out when she needed it. It was mostly just helping her when she wanted or needed it, asked for it.
So then when the chemo
Um,
treatments were
yeah.
over for that round, or
And
did they
that
end
was
for that round? And then did you have another, okay, mom made it through this?
yes. Yeah, because then after they did the chemo, it was mostly just okay. We feel like we knocked enough of it out that, and the liver is, it's your one organ that will regenerate. So it was, she still always had some spots there, but they felt like it was manageable. They didn't feel like they needed to go in and take it out. So that's why she just did this. Like, it was almost like a chemo shot that she would do once a month. She would go in and she would just, they'd do it in her stomach and she'd get the shot, and it was kind of like doing chemo but not really doing chemo, but it was just enough to keep things where they were because they felt like it was totally manageable. So yeah, then it was back to, okay, mom's good, we made it through, we're in the clear.
Yeah.
And then it was uh 2018, it had ended up in her brain.
Okay.
And that was the beginning of the end from there.
Um, So did
So,
you and your brothers have to jump in then and do more for her for that round? Like how, what,
yeah, that was definitely the eye opener for sure. And I was always just trying to be so optimistic. And my brother was like, my oldest brother, Micah, was like, oh shit, now it's in the brain. When he was just doom and gloom about it. And I was just like, it's fine. Basically, the first one that they found was like a teeny tiny pea-sized tumor that they found on her pituitary gland. And she had been having fainting spells, and actually picked Jake and I up from the airport on a Sunday. This was like the end of June. Jake and I did a belated cruise for our anniversary that year. My mom picked us up from the airport and she's driving us back to our house. And I was like, how was your week? Like, how are you doing? And she was like, well, I've fainted a couple times this week. And I was like, just you fainted? Like, and she was like nonchalant. Just like a couple
that's just
times this
like,
week.
oops, I fainted a bit.
Like,
Sorry.
yeah. And I was
Oh
like,
no.
what?
Yeah.
So I obviously was concerned and I was like, okay, when do you talk to Jotty? When do you see him next? That was her oncologist. And she had an appointment like that Thursday or Wednesday or something, sometime that week. She had an appointment for just our standard checkup. And I was like, okay, you need to tell him that this is going on. That's not good.
Mhm.
And she's, I've been drinking lots of water and I've been eating. And because I was like, were you dehydrated? Were you low blood sugar? What is happening? And she was like, I don't know.
Mhm.
So she goes in and um even just talking to the nurse, she was like, you're not leaving here. We're sending you to go get scans right now. And so yeah, found the tumor on her pituitary gland. So they sent her in, literally didn't even leave the hospital, and they had her in for radiation immediately, just hopped right on it.
And she hadn't done
And
radiation before. She'd only been doing chemo, or had she done radiation too?
no, yes, no, that was the first time she had to go through the radiation.
Mhm.
So they put her on really intensive. I think it was like 15 days, something
Mm.
like that, where she went literally every single day for 15 days and did radiation. And she was dating this guy at the time that was just, oh,
Oh.
he was fine, but in the long run, he was not a great guy. Basically, yeah, how do I put this nicely? He, when my mom got that diagnosis, immediately left the next day for 3 weeks
Oh my
to go
gosh.
to North Carolina, which they were supposed to go together. My mom met this guy. I'll back up really quick. My parents were part of a camping club when they got the fifth wheel. And so they would go and do all these camp trips all the time. When my dad passed, my mom stayed part of the camping club, and it was something that she could do and go and still do something that she enjoyed and be around people that she knew and
Yeah.
had hobbies with. So she had met this guy through the camping club, and he lived in Ohio, and they talked on the phone every day for like years, and then he ended up moving out here. And so when all of this happened, when we found out about the brain tumor, he was here. He was in Colorado and he was living with my mom. And they were supposed to go for the annual camp out, it's a nationwide camp out that was in North Carolina. So they were supposed to be going together. But then when my mom got this diagnosis and they were like, you're starting chemo tomorrow, today, whatever it was. Obviously, my mom didn't go, but he decided to still go. So he left for 3 weeks. So my mom's neighbor was taking her every single day to go for the radiation because my mom couldn't drive. That was just when you're getting radiation done on your brain, it's a
Can
little
only
bit more
imagine.
intense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So she didn't feel comfortable driving. It took everything out of her. And so her neighbor was driving her almost every day on my days off or Micah's days off, or if we were around, we would take her. But for the most part, her neighbor was taking her every day. And so she did that. And then the boyfriend came back and was there for about another month or so, a little over that, and then decided to move back to Ohio
Oh my gosh.
and just left my mom while
While
she's
she's in the
dealing
midst
with,
of, yeah. Oh my gosh.
yeah, while she's going through having an active brain tumor,
Hmm.
just goes, oh, I'm going to move back to Ohio, but I'm still going to be with you. We're still
Hmm.
going to be in a relationship, but I'm going to go back to Ohio.
Oh my
I was
gosh.
like, okay.
So then at that point,
I
did you
think that
guys
was,
have to step in more?
yeah, yeah. Not right away. Like she did okay through August, but we could definitely tell that something wasn't right and that there was definitely things that I don't think she wasn't telling us, or B, she was ignoring, because then she started falling in September.
Ooh.
And at first we thought it was just lingering effects of A, the brain tumor, and B, the radiation and all of that. But she was like, she said that she just felt so weak, like her legs were so weak that she just didn't feel like she had control over them.
Mm.
Um, and so she kept falling, and she took a really bad fall at one point. And in that moment, the middle brother, Nathan, was living with my mom. So she did have some help consistently at that point, somewhat. He for the most part was still able to help her, but being an alcoholic, he would go on his benders and
Mhm.
be unable to help her at points too. Obviously, I was down there anytime I could be to help out. But yeah, took a really bad fall at the end of September and ended up in the hospital. And this was 2018. Don't remember if I said that or not.
I don't either.
um,
Keep going.
but yeah, so September 2018, it was like the 22nd ish of September, and she never went back home.
Mm.
And she passed in December of 2018.
So do you feel like
The
you
last
guys,
couple of months were a lot.
yeah, for sure. I'm sure if she was just in the hospital, and so you guys had a little bit more of a heads up for that than with your dad, obviously. From those 2 months, 3 months that she was in the hospital, what was that like for you guys?
So basically, in a nutshell, from September, she went from hospital to she was in the hospital for a week or two. And then they decided to transfer to a rehab hospital because they, at that point, just thought, oh, she's just got weakness. She needs to gain some muscle and then she'll be fine. And so sent her to this rehab hospital. She was there for, I think, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and ended up back in the hospital
Mm.
because she was having blood clots. because she couldn't, at that point, she couldn't walk. She couldn't lift her legs. She wasn't able to get out of bed. There was definitely something going on. And I remember at one point telling Micah, my oldest brother, I was like, there's something else happening. There's something else going on. This isn't just this one tiny little tumor on the pituitary that is causing all of this. There's got to be either more tumors or something else going on. And he just kept being like, no, it's just this one. And it's a brain tumor. It's a brain tumor. And I'm like, I get that, Micah, but it's not in the part of the brain that like controls motor function.
Mm,
When she ended up back in the hospital again, they did another CAT scan and they found just her whole spine was riddled with
mm,
tumors. So that's basically why she couldn't walk, because
mm.
at that point the tumors were just taking over and shutting down her nervous system at that point. Um at at that point, Micah and I, and mostly Micah, my oldest brother was power of attorney and executor for all the things. So he had to be the one to make the decisions, but him and I did it all together. He never really officially would decide on one thing without him and I being on the same page about it.
And how old were you
So
at that?
even though he was the one that had to be like signing the paperwork and doing all the things, it was him and I making the decisions together along the way for everything. So I was 29,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, I was 29 in 2018.
29 and making all these hard decisions for your mom, about your mom, and then knowing that this was probably the end. What was going through your head emotionally for that?
Yeah, when she got that scan and they were basically like, "Hey, we'll do some radiation and we'll do some chemo, but it's basically palliative at this point." Palliative care just basically means like you're making them feel comfortable as you can make it. But at that point, that was definitely the okay, the yeah, this is it. It could be tomorrow, it could be 6 months from now, but this is the beginning of the end.
When they said they're making her comfortable for the end, is that roughly when your grieving process started, maybe?
To a certain extent, I think it did, but it was also hard because we were trying to figure out there were so many moving parts trying to make sure that all the logistics were in place, like, all the financial pieces of it and all of her life insurance things, and she had a long-term care policy, so we were trying to figure out how to access that to help us pay for everything, and basically ended up putting her into nursing home care because she needed 24-hour care.
Mm.
She needed to be on a catheter. She needed a nurse to help with everything. Like, she couldn't go to the bathroom by herself. At that point, she could still feed herself, but literally just watching her deteriorate for months was really hard. It definitely, you start to grieve. It's hard to really grieve somebody who's still there, but you're watching them literally day by day, not
Mm.
be able to do this and not be able to do that. And then she lost her voice. She couldn't even talk for the last 2.5-ish weeks. She ended up back in the hospital from the nursing home on Thanksgiving.
Oh, geez.
And we thought that was going to be it because she was basically in septic shock
Oh, wow.
and was unconscious for 24 hours. And like the nurses came in and she had the really shallow breathing, which is like a sign of your body like literally shutting down. And so we had the nurses coming in and being like, yeah, we're not sure if she's going to make it through the night. And Mike and I stayed in the hospital that night. And she came to the next morning. But after that, it was getting her back to the nursing home and basically getting her on hospice and just waiting
Mm.
for the day to come.
Okay, so the day comes and now you've lost both of your parents. Yeah. I don't know what type of question I'm trying to ask here, but that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. And I still to this day don't know many people that are as young as I am and don't have either one of their parents. I have a lot of friends who have unfortunately lost maybe one parent, but I think I only know two or three people that have lost both their parents as young, if or relatively as young as I did.
Oh, yeah, that's some pretty intense grief to go through at such a young age. How were you able to manage it, or were you? Obviously, like I said, I feel like grief never goes away. It just gets
No.
slightly easier to deal with as time goes on. But we all know there's all those triggers too, I'm sure, of Mother's Day and Father's Day and their death day and their birthdays. How was there anything that you did early on to help you get through that, or were you just surviving?
For my mom, I feel like it was just surviving
Mhm.
because there never really was a time, and even now there's still days where I'm like, I didn't have that space and that time like I did for my dad to be able to sit in my grief and really work through a lot of it. Like you said, you never really fully heal from grief. It's just it kind of molds and it changes, but that first year is definitely the hardest, but my mom and I just had my dad and I were close, but I was way closer with my mom. She was like my best friend. And so losing her, I feel like I still to this day struggle more with my mom than I do my dad. I miss them both
Sure.
terribly, but I feel like it's harder for me with my mom. And it was as soon as she died, it was just we had to jump into getting a house cleared out and getting the house sold and taking care of selling the cars and selling the camper and getting my brother moved out and getting him set up with a place to live. And then,
So you didn't even
and then so that took like,
really grieve or start to grieve until maybe after all that stuff was done.
yeah, which was June. We closed on the house on June 4th because that's Jake and I's wedding anniversary. So June 4th of 2019. Micah and Crystal took off to move down to Arizona on June 1st of 2019. So not only had I just lost my mom, I was now my only family that I have left because I don't really have a relationship with my other brother. My only family is now moving to a different state
Mm.
to be closer to my sister-in-law's whole family is down there. So they wanted my nephew to be close to the grandparents that he had left and family and everything. And
But that's another loss.
yeah, I'm all alone.
Oh,
um and then it was 2019 was just Jake and I did a lot of traveling and we booked a trip to New Zealand. So then from that point during the summer we took some trips and then it was planning New Zealand and this huge trip that we wanted to go on and we were actively making moves towards trying to start a family and just you're trying to move on with your life and move on to the next steps, but then I never really took the time to like really grieve. I feel like I was trying to grieve while trying to live life and run my own business and all these things. And then we went to New Zealand at the end of the year in 2019 and came back and then it was COVID and you're in a
mm,
pandemic and then it was just and here we are 4 years later, but it still feels like we're somewhat still in it. Not obviously to the extent of 2020, but yeah, and definitely being a mom without your mom
mm,
is the hardest thing for me.
man.
There's constantly times where I just want to call her and be like, "How do I do this? And what did you do? And how was I like a kid? How did you get through this stage?" And that's definitely one of the hardest parts.
Oh, how are you doing with your grief now?
I mean, I manage pretty well. I'm very excited to go on this retreat in June that my friend is hosting because she does a lot of it basically like she does them to help people burn from or sorry, heal from burnout.
Mhm.
but she does a lot of the sound healing, and it's yoga and meditation every day. And I am just taking this as an opportunity for myself to take the time to work
Mm.
through areas of my grief with her that I haven't given myself the time or space to sit with.
Yeah.
So I'm excited and also slightly terrified to
It's
sit
hard to
with those
face
feelings
those
for 6 days.
feelings, right? It's hard. Life's hard and this shit's hard. Of course, we don't want to actually face it. I guess at some point we have to move on. And I think it's interesting that you're what, 5 years out from your mom passing? Was it 2019? Is that what you said? Or
Mhm.
2018?
2018, so it's
Okay.
been just over 5.
Yeah, and still working through that process. Again, grief never goes away, so we have to just work through it. And there's so many things I'm sure that come up in life, like you said,
Yeah,
being
I
a
mean,
mom and wanting your mom and all those things that keep coming up and maybe feeling sad about missing out on some of those experiences with your mom you could have had.
yeah, definitely. We had booked a trip in 2018. My mom and I had booked a trip to go down to Mexico to do Dia de los Muertos together, and I was so excited because I had never really done a mother-daughter trip with her, and she traveled all the time, but she was my parents traveled, and they did all the cruises together, and then when my dad passed, my mom would go and travel with her best friend, and she would do these trips, and she would do this, and she'd do that, and she'd do cruises and all the things, but we had never really done one ourselves, and so I was so excited to get to do this trip with her, and then she couldn't go, so she insisted that Jake and I still went, and that was the worst vacation of my entire life because all I wanted to do was be home and
Mm.
be with her, but she wanted me to be there, and my brother was like, "This is what she wants, just go, it's fine, nothing's gonna happen while you're gone," and so we went, and I hated every second of it,
Mm.
mostly because I was supposed to be there with her, but
Right. Yeah, that's so hard. Oh, I'm really sorry that you had to go through all of that. That is a lot to go through at such a young age. I can only imagine. I don't think I know of anybody who's lost both of their parents that young. So I am just genuinely so sorry that you had to go through that. But you seem like you're being a rock star now and trying to work through it all still. And aren't we all still trying to work through something?
oh, of course,
Yeah.
even just daily life.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for anybody that might be in your shoes in your situation or anything like that?
After going through everything, and whenever I have a friend who loses, especially a parent, I always tell them I have two I don't know if I would say words of advice or just more just sentiments. My one that I always say to people is take the time to grieve.
Mm,
Take your time to sit in the feelings and feel what you need to feel and do what you need to do to make your heart and your soul feel better about having lost that piece of you.
mhm.
And then my other one that I always have to remind myself about is a quote that I saw one time and it just fully stuck with me that grief is our last act of love that we can give to somebody that we've lost.
Ooh,
And where there is heavy grief, there was intense love.
ooh,
And I always have to remind myself about that because when you love somebody with your whole heart, and especially when they're your parents, you love them unconditionally. They are the reason you exist, and when you just feel like you're so lost without them, I just have to be like, "I'm feeling this broken because I loved them so much."
mm.
Um,
That's so deep and profound. I love that. It's anybody who's gone through grief, I think, would agree with that wholeheartedly. Like, oh, that was good. That was some good parting words. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
But
welcome.
Thank you so much for coming on here and talking about this. I have a feeling we're going to have you on again later down the road to talk some more because I feel like we could just talk all day long about life. But thank you for opening up and sharing your story and being vulnerable and talking about the hard shit because that is not an easy thing to do. And I really appreciate you coming on and doing that. Yeah. And I love you. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
I love you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.